How is Google positioned right now?
Google. I can see it's really itching to say something.
Well, yeah, no, I think this is an example. They're definitely going to be a winner coming out of this. I think that's actually one of the big shifts is the slowly progression that is happening towards Google becoming a dominant booking partner. I think is only going to speed up during this. I think that some of the actions they've taken, so changing their commission model, is in a perfect example of helping hotels make a decision, but what appears to be a decision between I've either got to spend my own marketing dollars and take a risk, or I can go and just pay commissions. And Google have extended and improved their commission model so that hotels can actually bid less and less and only pay when someone comes through the door. So I think they've done a great job on supplier side, and I think also the integration they have with Google Maps and the fact that Google will always be that starting point of search means that they're just going to get an increase proportionately in the market. I think this definitely is a big opportunity for Google, and particularly also when you think because there are many players in this market, and another area is wholesale and the reselling of third-party rates, kind of that was plaguing the industry a little bit. I think that's going to reduce, and that also plays into Google's hands. So I think Google most likely come out trumps as usual, as so often in many of their markets.
Do you think that will reduce though with Google and the whole kind of, I mean, it's still kind of metasearch, right? The issue with, I call them fourth parties, but Amoma, Cancelon, all those, you think that's going to reduce as Google gets bigger and bigger? Are they going to do a better job, other people, but of squashing it than some of the other metasearch?
Well, Andrew's shaking his head. I think it has to reduce because of the lack of hotels sending non-refundable rates. If the main reason why there's a grey market is because there are non-refundable rates, which means that hotels can't book and cancel these fourth party or third party distributors. And when non-refundable rates disappear out of the market because there's an obviously understanding that consumers don't want them, I think it makes it so much harder for wholesalers to play that dodgy game that they've been playing. I think for the next 2 years, it's so much easier for hotels to identify which partners are actually driving incremental business.
Yeah, I was actually going to use that as an example of why parity is going to be so important as business starts to come back, because as stuff shifts towards Google, towards metasearch, people are going to have to really, really be careful with what wholesalers they're trusting, the rates that they're giving out, and how they're monitoring that. Because if people are shifting towards these other sites, the issue is just going to grow, and it's already a huge problem for a lot of hotels.
It is, and my fear is, I mean, honestly speaking, some of the clients that we work with, I take a slightly different view from Charlie. It's a good point that you made, Charlie, but I just think that generally speaking, in the longer term trend is that as we've seen people getting better at policing rate parity with OTAs, the big OTAs, we have seen in parts of the world a lot of what I would call tier 2 might be generous OTAs appearing quite frequently within GHA, in particular in Google Hotel ads, offering rates that either are massively undercutting on parity, or actually in reality, when you go through, just don't exist. They're breaking Google policy, they're doing bait and switch, they're taking taxes out, they're doing all kinds of things which you're not supposed to do. And we found that Google are not always as good as they should be when these things are flagged, compared to traditional metas, if you can call them traditional, but the Trivagos, the TripAdvisors of the world, they're not as good at policing their own policies when these issues are raised. And obviously for the hotels to do it by themselves can sometimes be quite challenging. It's sometimes quite actually hard to find who is this mystery person behind this site. But there's another dynamic I also think is interesting there. And this is one I've observed with Google. I mean, we partner with Google and we have the utmost respect for Google as a business professionally. I think the other tension that Google has, which I detect, is of course like 70% of Google's revenues come from advertising. And often this whole debate is kind of positioned as being Google versus the OTAs. But if you think about it, 70% of your revenue, 71% I think, comes from advertising. And then travel is your third biggest category. And easily the two biggest Google advertisers in travel are online travel agents. In fact, Google and Booking.com spend roughly about 5% of Google's revenues. And Google and Expedia are easily in Google's top 10 advertisers if you believe most of the sort of data which floats around. They don't tell you themselves, but probably are. They've got that tension there in terms of, if they try to, on the product side, deliver the best experience, the risk is that they undermine their own advertising business. And although we've seen the really interesting move on commission, on the other side, you do see things like Book with Google. The conditions for having Book with Google functionality on your Google hotel ads very much favour larger chains and online travel agents. You have to have a large minimum number of properties, you have to have a large minimum number of rooms available, and a large minimum number of transactions, which an independent hotel is not going to have. An OTA will pass that bench very easily. So you do see a bit of hedging of bets there, I think, on the Google side, and I do detect that tension between the revenue they get from online travel agents, which is important to them, and also their aspirations from a travel perspective and in terms of delivering the best customer experience, which for sure a lot of their engineers are very, very focused on.
Nicole, from your perspective as a revenue manager, I mean, what's an independent hotel to do?
Well, I think this goes back to something that Charlie had mentioned more towards the beginning, is kind of the assumption that guests will actually be going to your site more, spending a little more time, because they need to have that trust with the hotel and their booking right now to feel comfortable staying. And that's a really, really good opportunity to look at both just what you're offering the guests for booking direct, but also how you can use that from an ancillary revenue perspective to tie into what you're offering, how you're promoting that on your site. And take advantage of the fact that people are going to be spending, I think, a little bit more time researching and a little bit more time looking at the content that you are giving them. And hotels can really use that to their favor in how they are communicating with their guests and what they're putting in front of them from a book direct perspective versus just, on a other major site. And I'll put this question to Charlie and Andrew, because I don't have the answer, but I wonder from a consumer trust perspective, where do you think people are at with booking on Google versus, Expedia, Booking? Those are very established names, and I think the consumer is comfortable with them, and just how much it's going to take to actually shift that behavior, if we are talking Google versus the OTAs, to get to where that's, people are just like, okay, this is how I book now. And they actually that way versus a different channel.
I'm yet to really believe that Book on Google is going to overtake, for example, booking through to the supplier site or the OTA. And there was a big push by them a couple of years ago, and it definitely has increased conversion rates for some hotels who have particularly bad websites and conversion rates, but it hasn't really had the adoption. I think that ultimately right now, most people are going to be more likely, like we always saw before, that even when the OTAs had their very slick sites and everything else, most guests said they would prefer, if they could, if prices were the same, to book direct. So I think my advice to revenue managers would be, do think about parity, because people are going to be shopping around. This is another reason why Google will remain very strong, is people do want to see those price comparisons more than ever, right? We're going through a recession. So make sure you've got parity. But the parity issues that most hotels are likely to have will not be down, I don't think, to the third-party wholesalers. They will be down to the other side of parity we see a lot, which are issues that are just plain mistakes. It's the hotelier uploading a rate or a special offer or something else to an OTA and then forgetting to take it down a month later after that special's gone. So just being really on top of the offer management that you've got. And then I think the other thing I'd say is, now is a time like never before for hoteliers to flex their own muscles a little bit and say, we're going to offer benefits for booking direct that we didn't before. Some hotels get very scared about offering something better for direct booking in terms of terms than they would via OTAs. And what we're beginning to see already is hotels taking a much firmer line on, no, we want our guests to book direct. Now more than ever before, we need a direct relationship with them before they walk in the door, because we want to keep down cancellations. And we're going to give guests better information and advantages of making that direct booking. So I think that would be my advice, is you got to stick on top of your parity, look for self-created errors, of which there are a very large number, and make sure that you're offering a reason to book direct. I don't think suddenly everyone's going to book using Book on Google. That wasn't, sorry, my point earlier. It was more that Google will drive more direct to the supplier side.
I mean, in answer to your question, I don't entirely agree with Charlie, because we know people who have used Book Direct who have seen quite big uplifts in their conversion. And I would say part of the reason why it hasn't adopted is because of the rules they've put on it, the restrictions they put on it have prevented people from, suppliers from accessing the service in many respects. And I think in a way it's a bit of a sop to the OTAs. But that said, in terms of your question around trust with Google, I honestly don't think it's that much of an issue, because I know in the States, we were talking earlier about how checks are still quite a popular method of payment in the US, which seems quite strange to people from outside of the US, and particularly in Asia. But it is the case that most people now are, or a lot of people certainly are, using every day their smartphone to pay for stuff. And that's Google Pay. Predominantly, it's Google Pay. Apple Pay is strong, but in European markets, it's Google Pay is the dominant player. So they're quite used to trusting Google with their credit card details. They know that Google already know everything about them anyway. So it's like, they know everything about me anyway. So almost that comes with a degree of trust, implicit trust, or a resignation that there's not much that Google don't know about them already. So I think they will trust Google. There is a say-do thing on the booking piece. I mean, yes, most people would rather book direct. And Charlie's right. One of the problems has been that a lot of hotels haven't had very good websites. And that's often because they haven't prioritized it. And as we were talking about earlier, if you were a revenue manager or a hotel owner, now is a good time to fix that, sort that out, just cover off the basics, make sure your website is responsive, make sure it has a decent booking flow. And there's plenty of people who can help you with that, including ourselves. But the other point there, which was around the management of your rates, yeah, I mean, Charlie's absolutely bang on the money. That I would agree 100+% with Charlie there on that. And it's really, really important to stay on top of that right now in terms of the revenue management, the rate management.
All right. That's a great conversation. Some great points you guys brought up. I really appreciate it.